Hello. So welcome to today's Australian Adoption User Group for July. The presentation is available. I have pinned it into chat for you so that you can find it both now as well as during the presentation and afterwards. So it's actually pinned there for the time being. So if you want to see the presentation, we'll be in there and we'll drop in SWOOP's presentation. We'll put that link in there fairly shortly as well. But I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting from today and to pay my respects to past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples with us today. Okay. I ask that we all be welcoming, open. We've all got different viewpoints in regards to this technology. Some of us are a little stronger on our viewpoints than others, without a doubt. But I ask that we be also kind and understanding of our various differences and that we're patient and that we use appropriate language in chat and any gifts and be considerate to others. My name is Kirsty McGrath. If you haven't actually been to the session before, I am here to guide you through. And I always start with a bit of a, what have I been up to, as always. So what have I been up to? I have been, of course, making cakes, as always, doing some cakes. This was my brother's and sister-in-law's 50th birthday cake, and I thought this time I'd show you some of the layers. So it was a chocolate coffee cake, then it had a layer of mousse, and then it had a layer of a rather rich raspberry chocolate biscuit that I crushed up, and then a layer of raspberry buttercream as well to go with it. So that was the cake that I actually made for their 50th. So having a bit of fun. What else have I been doing? Of course, Viva was on in Sydney. Went and did it from a cruise. It was amazing. I highly recommend. And try and choose one of the nights that they're actually doing the drone show. So cool and really good from the water. I've been doing a bit of, I like my mindfulness puzzles as well. I haven't really talked about the puzzles, but I have a puzzle table and it's huge with lots and lots and lots of puzzles. It's its own, the kitchen islands that you buy. I got one of those. That's how serious I am about my puzzling. Because when I'm not cake decorating, which is also a mindfulness thing, I'm often doing puzzles. So it's good to have some of those hobbies and things that can shut us down from the technology in our head. I also got roped into painting my brother's new shed. Yay. And I just said, if I get paint in my hair, Tagger, you're it for my hair appointment, I can tell you now. So covered up. That's also a bit of mindfulness. There's nothing like, I did all the cutting in, so I was doing all the fine work cutting in. Went and saw Michael McIntyre. Highly recommend if anyone wants to see Michael McIntyre. I also saw Kitty Flanagan, and I've seen so many comedy festival. They're all coming to town. So I got to see some pretty cool comedians, have a good laugh for the month. So that was my month. But I am going to jump over and I'm immediately going to get into my guest speakers. It's actually not just one, my guest speakers.
Oh.
I still have it, guys. Swoop. Ooh, we're welcoming Swoop. Swoop's here to talk us about the latest state of digital collaboration. Look, I'm not going to dive into it. I'm going to let them explain, who they are, what they're doing, and why I've actually brought them in. Because I think that some of the analytics that actually comes, I won't mess up my hair. I'm going to the hairdresser this afternoon. I'll hand over to you guys before I then go into the what's new in adoption and what's new in Microsoft 365. So we have Emily, we have Dr. Laurence Lock Lee and Sharon here with us. So really looking forward to hearing what actually happened in the latest analysis.
Thanks so much, Kirsty. Happy for me to share my screen now?
Absolutely. Yep, you take over.
Awesome. Great. So lovely to be chatting with you all today. We will be going through some of the key insights and findings from our latest M365 and Microsoft Teams benchmarking report. Before we get into things, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to acknowledge the Dapurjung people. I'm based on the central coast of New South Wales. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where everyone is participated, where everyone is located today. And I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We have a few sort of key points that we'd like to get through today. Of course, we'll be going through some of the key findings and insights, but we also we really like to take an opportunity to have you all maybe pause and reflect a little bit on your own digital collaboration habits as well. And we might be able to find some interesting ways that your current habits actually line up with the trends that we're seeing in the data this year. You might also see that maybe you perform a little bit differently, and I suspect for a lot of you, probably being digital collaboration specialists, and I know that you're looking at this sort of thing every day, maybe your results are a little bit different to what we see broadly as well. We're going to be calling out some of the 2023 collaboration champions as well, and we'll also be deep diving into some of the insights that we've been able to learn through our case study interviews with those top performers. And of course, please, ask us questions throughout. If you want to raise your hand, use the chat, whatever you'd like to do, and we can maybe just clarify and provide some extra answers and insights for you as well. My name's Emily. I am the director for APAC for SWOOP. So I'm here to look after all of our fabulous customers across the region. And I'm also joined by Dr. Laurence Lock Lee. Laurie is responsible for crunching all of the numbers in our benchmarking studies that we run every year. First half of the year is when we focus on the M365 and the teams. And then at the moment, we're actually starting to pivot our focus towards Viva Engage and SharePoint intranets, which is really exciting as well. I'm also joined by Sharon Dawson, and Sharon is responsible for all of our fantastic case study stories you see on the SWOOP website. So Sharon interviews all of the top performers that we identify as a part of the study, writes the stories, and they serve as great inspiration for those who are looking to maybe change up the ways that the way that they're doing things in their organisation, or even just for yourselves as individuals as well. Before we do get into the insights, this is the sort of moment where we want you to maybe pause and reflect a little bit. So if you'd like to just grab a device that you have nearby, we've just got 3 really quick questions. I'm hoping that QR code works for me. It looks a little bit blurry on my screen, but I'm sure it will be fine. If that's not working, you can also head to menti.com. And there's a code there at the top. It's just 26575236, and in the next few seconds I'll be heading over to the Menti page. There might already be a question there waiting for you, so I'll see you all over there. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to find out is how many hours do you spend in online meetings per day? 0 to 1 hours, 1 to 2 hours, 2 to 3. Okay, we've got a few falling into the 3 to 4. Yet to have anyone fall into the 4+, which I think is probably a good thing. So we seem to be sort of sitting around that kind of middle ground. There doesn't seem to be anyone falling into that lower category, the 0 to 1 hours. So, and I think maybe some of this might tie in nicely with some of our insights that we go through today as well. I'll move on to our next question. How many hours a day do you spend in email? Now, this could be a combination of you sending emails, reading emails. Okay, we've got a little bit more time spent in emails here. Now, I'm also wondering if you could even maybe reflect on the split between you emailing externally and emailing internally within your organizations too. I would hope if you are emailing, I would hope the majority of them are external, where you need to rely on email to do those sorts of things. But internally, that's the point where we would say we'd love to see you doing more of that collaboration across channels within Microsoft Teams, within Viva Engage if you're using that platform. But we have an interesting spread across the board for that one as well. And I'm expecting there to be quite high results for one particular answer here, especially for this group of people. Do you use Microsoft Teams channels daily to collaborate? It's okay, you can be honest as well if you do fall into the other category. Okay, thank you. I appreciate your honesty for the no. That's okay. I'm sure some of the insights today might help you or point you in the right direction. I'm sure some of the insights from the case studies with the top performers will, maybe also cause for you to reflect as well. Let's jump back into the content. If you just bear with me 1 second. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Laurie, who's going to take us through the key findings from the report that we released just last month. So over to you, Laurie.
Okay, thanks, Emily. So those of you that are not familiar with how SWOOP does its benchmarking, we don't run surveys. We actually look at what everybody is doing. So we look at the interaction data. Some of it's called the digital exhaust, sometimes referred to as that. This time we combined the M365 and the Teams benchmarking together. So we had something like 19 organisations that trialled to be part of the M365, 266,000 employees. A good proportion of those are guests, so that's good to see, in fact. And in terms of the teams, 17 organisations, 67,000 teams. So, you know, these are big numbers in any sort of studies that we've certainly seen. So, and as I said, we measure what everybody is doing, not just those that decide to fill in a survey. So we think we get quite a different point of view than survey-based research. So next slide. So the first thing is something that we found last year with a little bit of trepidation, that we think the fact that people are saying they're overwhelmed with too many Microsoft Teams meetings is actually a myth, right? So when we measure it, those that are in too many meetings, we think is probably only about 1% of the population. We got the data on the next one, Emily, or not? So, all right, yeah, 1% of, you know, so that's sort of 5 or more Teams meetings each day. I think nobody in our little poll had over that. So, but if you're in meetings overload, you would think, well, 5 meetings, that's probably overload. I would imagine some people would say, well, it needs to be even more than that. But it's only 1%, right? It's only small. So less than 17% have more than 2 meetings a day on Microsoft Teams, right? Now, a lot of you people here probably wouldn't fit into that, but if you look across the whole organisation, you know, sort of, you know, then we pick up people that, you know, sit on the edges of organisations. Some of them are frontline workers, but I might point out that we filtered out anybody who hadn't been in a meeting in the last 6 months. So people that were in our sample actually had to have attended at least one meeting. So we know that they're sort of alive and breathing and know how to use a meeting, right? So less than an hour a day spent in Teams meetings on average, right? So if we look across the whole organisation, you know, we're not overloaded with meetings, right? Some of you are, most of you aren't. So if we go to the next one. Now, I guess we got some, for me, unexpected validation from this. So those of you that read the Microsoft Work Trends report, you might have seen this sort of data reported. So basically, with their survey data, the number one productivity disruptor was inefficient meetings, followed closely by too many meetings at number 3. Right? This is what the survey data is telling you. The workplace analytics data, which is like ours, looking across the whole sort of group, the heaviest meeting user group, the top 25%, spend 7.5 hours a week in meetings. That's 1.5 hours per day, right? I went back and looked at our data and filtered for the top 25%, and our number was 1.6 hours per day, right? So we've got the same thing, right? So we feel that we've been validated. But when you look at these two statements, they don't make sense, do they? The survey says we're in too many meetings. The workplace analytics says, wow, you know, 1.5 meetings per day for the busiest 25%. Is that overload? You know, I don't think so. So I've written an article about this for Forbes. It'll come out soon. But, you know, we can put too much emphasis on survey data sometimes. And let's face it, those people that aren't digitally active aren't filling in the surveys either, right? So in essence, what we're looking at is a silent majority, you know. So, you know, like there's, you know, something like 83% of staff have less than 2 meetings a day, right? So, and a bigger proportion don't have any meetings per day, right? So you could sort of say, well, you know, we're worried about this 1% that are overloaded, but what about the like 90% that aren't having enough meetings? You know, what about them? You know, some of them, of course, you might say they're majorly frontline workers, but remember, we've only included people that have at least been in a meeting before, so they at least know what they are. So yeah, what about these people that aren't interacting at all? You know, what about this silent, sort of digitally silent sort of community? They're just totally ignored. They don't fill in surveys, you don't know about them. What are they doing? So in essence, you know, this is what we see the analytics needs to uncover. You know, what are these sorts of people doing? Should they be doing more rather than less? let's move on, Emily. So the other thing, sadly, we found is that despite the richness in the M365 suite, people are still using email. They did get better at using meetings, right? So we did notice that people were getting better at meetings. And of course, with meetings comes chat. So obviously chat's pretty natural. So we're seeing a lot of sort of email meeting chat, which we found last year as well. But, we're not seeing enough of the asynchronous work that can happen in the persistent channels of Teams channels, and to a lesser extent Viva Engage, which was Yammer, right? So 76% of people using Microsoft Teams don't use channels. Now, I think that, you people on this call were probably the other way around. 71% of staff not posted in a Viva Engage community. This is over a 6-month period, right? So, and 25% have done neither of those things. So, we've still got a long way to go to sort of learn how to work asynchronously across the organisation, right? So, of course, excluding your good cells who are doing the right thing. We also did ROI calculations last year and this year. We sort of did borrow a methodology from one of our clients who looked at things like, how much time can we save by, rather than doing internal emails, converting those to chat channels or Viva Engage or what have you, having less meetings. And I think the researchers told us that 50% of meetings that we don't really need to have. So even though I'm saying that, we aren't meeting overloaded, those that are could probably do with less of those. And when we take into account the time you could save in not using emails and using more efficient channels, and also doing less meetings and using the asynchronous channels again, that comes out to be equivalent to about a 4.5% increase in headcount, so, and that's substantial for most organisations. And again, as I said, this year was pretty much similar to last year.
Laurie, can I just jump in for a sec to ask you a question? Back to the meetings and the top 1%. With the data, can you find out on Active Directory what those job roles are for that top 1%? It's just a question Belinda asked in the chat.
Well, I think you people probably can. We job roles are things that are in your directory that we have done it in previous years for particular organisations that have given access to their directory, and also you need to have organisations that relatively sort of strict about how they write job roles. So we have in previous reports looked at seniority, I think, and then looked at some others. I think Emily will be able to find those, but yeah, not this year. We didn't look at particular roles, but we have done it in the past. Right? So this next thing we looked at organisational groups. So if you think again, I just spoke about the Active Directory. Your department or group in your Active Directory, more or less, for most organisations, that is their formal hierarchy. So in other words, you will only be a member of one of those. So when we looked at those groups and we looked at the collaboration habits across those groups, sometimes I refer to those as functional groups because they're part of the hierarchy rather than, let's say, a digital team. When we look at those, sort of only about 5% of them had what I'd say strong digital collaboration habits and little variation within the team. So think about a team where, there's one or two people that only ever want to use email. They don't want to use any of the other tools. Of course, if you're a member of a team with people like that, you've actually got to communicate twice, don't you? You've got to communicate using your channels or your chat or whatever, and then you've got to send an email for these other people. Now, that's not uncommon. So what we see is best practices, those teams that actually have little variation in their digital habits. And if we look at, and also I will point out in terms of, we had this in just a call just recently, how much chat there is going on. 241 million chat messages for every million channel messages. So that's a big ratio. And I'm not saying that there's too much chat, but what we're saying is that, the balance is sort of probably wrong here, and we do some analysis in the report around chat, so what we found in the past is that, chat is mostly one-on-one, but when it goes to more than one-on-one, there is a danger that we're creating knowledge that's going to be lost in chat, and we certainly had clients who have moved chat conversations that have moved up into multiple people chats into channels, and they'll even copy them manually into channels, because that's where you get persistence. It's nearly impossible to find stuff in chat over time. And in fact, it could disappear, depending on your policies and so forth. So this is our becoming our famous boomerang curve, right? And to explain this, on the vertical axis, this is your group's average digital habits score. So if you've got a score of 0.9, that means that on average across your whole team, you're scoring 0.9 or above. At the other end, you've got very much people that are hardly doing anything good, if you like. So now the horizontal axis is the variation within the group, right? So if you've got a group where people are using a whole heap of different things, you've got quite different habits, you're going to be a dot way out on the far right. The interesting thing about this boomerang curve is that, there's low variation at the bottom and the top. Right, the low variation at the bottom is because everybody is doing nothing much at all, right? So they're unified in their inactivity. On the top, they're all doing great stuff together, and their habits are aligned, and that's what we want to aim for. Now you can see it's a bit thinner up the top there, and it's a bit thicker down the bottom. There is a bit of a claw there that we commented on around the 0.3 mark. That's people that are actually quite good at meeting behaviours. So they're good screen sharing, turning on the camera, also using SharePoint, but they're actually terrible at everything else, right? So there is this group that have got good at meetings in SharePoint, down there. But nevertheless, what this is showing us is a sort of a learning journey. There's a point around the halfway mark where you do start to get a critical mass, and this is all peer-to-peer learning, social learning, and this has been, if you like, reinforced by some of the case studies that Sharon will talk about, where we found groups where people really do learn from each other and do improve their overall performance by learning from each other without a lot of intervention. A little bit of support, but sometimes for some of them none at all. So let's go to. So I guess the other point I'd make. So we talk about self-directed teams and teams that working type teams, but also we're finding that channels is used for organizational groups. So your functional organizational groups in your hierarchy. It's a good place to have if you've got a department, if you like, that you're the leader of. It's a good thing to create a team and a team's channel for that group. And the reason I say that is that those 70-something% of people that never post in channels, some of them probably don't post in channels because they're just not a member of a team. Right? They're not a member of a digital team, or if they are, it's a team that's not being used much at all. At least if every group has a team, there's a place for them to post in channels, and it's good for the functional leader as well, of course, because then you've got persistence of interactions that are happening within your digital group in this case, right? So overall, though, we did see a significant improvement of use of the M365 over the last 12 months. So more people are using channels. There's more guests, right? So there's more people that have got over this hump of can we have external people in. There is more file sharing over SharePoint. So if we look at the, not so much the mix, but the overall levels of use of the M365, we did see a significant uptick from last year. So that's good news. I think I'm sort of, in terms of going through here, I think I'm running short on time here now, but nevertheless, I think I spoke to this. The activity levels are up 30
You're
minutes
right.
a day
It's all
on
good.
average.
You go as long as you need to.
Okay, spent on collaborating in SharePoint files. So as I said, it's, we measure the proportion of one of the habits is SharePoint versus OneDrive. So what's that ratio? Think about your own ratio. We lean towards putting stuff in SharePoint, sort of guest accounts. Of course, guest accounts have been used by some of our digital specialists who are consulting firms. So they're in the regular habit of setting up projects with customers on Teams, and either if it's on their tenant, then they're inviting people as a guest, or they may actually be joining their customers' tenant and they come in as guests. So we've seen a good growth in that. And I guess what's very encouraging, 71% of the highest performing teams on Teams we classify as self-directed teams, right? So we do use sort of AI type algorithms to classify teams based on the interaction patterns within the team. And if you think about a self-directed team as a team where everybody is connecting with everybody else, that's the idealistic self-directed team. You know, we will classify them or those that are close to that as a self-directed team. And we've seen a growth in that. So I think this is a very positive thing in terms of introducing this whole agile teaming behaviour within organisations. We've still got a very long way to go. I mean, a lot of organisations are nowhere near that. I think our digital specialists, we had 6 of those in our benchmarking. They were getting there. Most of them were in that sort of space. So we know what good looks like, but we know that there's still a long path for most organisations to get there. So, but nevertheless, it's encouraging that has increased since last year. So how are we going? Next slide, Emily. Okay, so I was meant to hand over. We planned this before, and we said I was going to hand over at 12:25 to Sharon. It's 12:28.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. Actually, Laurie, just can you answer Matthew's question in the chat? Matthew, we've got, we can share a blog post that's got all the team types that we've classified. Yep, so I'll get Laurie to share that. So what's interesting, as you can see, we've analysed millions and millions of M365 and Microsoft Teams interactions. But when we get the data, we can see which organization it comes from, but it's all anonymous to us. So all we have is ID numbers of teams that are high performing. And Laurie goes and ranks all of those teams. So out of the 67,000 Microsoft teams that he analysed, that they were ranked as well. And so we've then gone out to those organisations and given them the ID numbers, those that agreed to share it with us, and then spoken to those teams to find out what best practice looks like. It's all well and good for us to have the data, but what does that look like in the workplace, and how can other people learn from these successful teams? So this is why we then like to talk to these teams and do the case studies. So out of all those organisations, these were our champions this year. We had 8 champions, and you'll see there's a few local ones: Cricket Australia, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and Engage Squared, which is actually a Microsoft Partner of the Year. So one of the things that's really interesting this year that stood out was a common trait between all of these teams and departments that we spoke with, and that was that they'd all made the decision to work together in the same way on either Microsoft Teams or M365 platform. So working in the same way for most of them, it meant working out loud in Microsoft Teams channels rather than chat. So chat was purely just for those very quick one-on-one things like where are you going for lunch type of thing. It was sharing files in Teams channels via SharePoint, turning on the cameras during Teams meeting, never using email for internal communications because everything was actually in the Teams channel. And it was all about, and a lot of working asynchronously as well. So actually, one of the things that was interesting too, and you'll see Virgin Media O2 there, which is the UK's biggest telco. They merged last year, Virgin Media and O2. And when we reached out to their top team, the leader of that team said straight away, well, you must have this wrong because we're not doing anything special. This is the way we work day to day, which was actually really interesting because the data backs this up. While it's a natural way of working for them, we found that only 24% of employees work collaboratively in any sort of a way on Microsoft Teams channels, and only 5%, you remember Laurie mentioned, only 5% have strong and consistent collaboration habits in M365. So I'm just going to go and talk to you about some of these case studies that we shared. And given cricket's a pretty hot topic at the moment, You can all share your thoughts about that in the comment. I thought I'd start with Cricket Australia. And there's this great story. Their highest performing team was called the Tickets and Premium Experience Team. And it's actually everyone in Cricket Australia who sells tickets to like everything from test matches to one-day internationals to T20 games, everything there. So what they were, this team, obviously they've got people geographically located around the country, all in their own states. But until they started using Teams just before or around the pandemic when it started, it got to the point that they had to be able to work together because they're a very collaborative team and they all work off each other. So someone, for example, working in Brisbane, it came to the point that they ended up having to relocate to Melbourne. So they couldn't actually be in their home market anymore where they had to sell the tickets. They had to go and live in Melbourne. They'd spend out of a month, they'd spend 3 weeks in Melbourne, and then they'd spend 1 week back in Brisbane. So they'd fly back to Brisbane, try to sell all their tickets during that time, meetings, one meeting after another because they were only there for a week out of a month. Not great working practice. So since Teams has been introduced, they have been able to stay in their home state and in their sales market, and then they work collaboratively on team. So I guess take a moment to think about the efficiencies and the return on investment from working this way. So there's no more relocation costs, there's no more monthly flights and a week of paid accommodation back to their home state. Plus, a lot of these people had to pack up their families and move into state. And what's probably even better for their markets is they're now physically present in the market that they're servicing rather than being in Melbourne at Cricket Australia's headquarters. So all their conversations relating to the team are shared in Microsoft Teams channels, not in chat. All the files and documents, everything else relating to the team is in Teams. Their weekly team meetings are now held in Teams, whereas in the past it had to be in person in the Melbourne office. So again, they'd have to schedule to make sure that everybody was available in Melbourne at that week. And also now side meetings can be held at any time they want to be. What's also important is guests are invited into these Microsoft Teams channels. And so those guests are usually like the state cricketing body's ticketing staff. So then those key stakeholders now get access to this information as well. And another thing that Rhiannon, you'll see some really nice quotes there from Rhiannon Crowe. She was the leader of this team that we identified as the top performing team. She was saying when it comes to match day, now everything is on Teams. So like if somebody's sick on the day and they can't attend an event, all the necessary information can be easily accessed on Teams, and anyone else can just go and fill in that spot if someone should be away. And the same applies if someone leaves the company. So Rhiannon, there was another quote from her saying it's about future-proofing their team as well. So I totally recommend you read that story. There's a lot more to it, and you might like the little pick that we've added in there just for a bit of controversy about what's happened overnight. So the next one I'm going to talk to you about is New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. And this is the New Zealand federal government agency for investment in New Zealand. And actually, as Laurie said, the top 6 organisations we had in our benchmarking are what we call the digital specialist firms. So they're the ones, who make their living helping clients to work more effectively in M365 and other digital tools. So just behind those 6 enterprises was a company called Real Foundations, which is a global property consulting and management organisation based in the US, or they're headquartered in the US. And closely behind that was New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. So I saw someone mentioned federal government organisations in the chat. Really impressive that this is a federal government organisation and they're performing so well. So they had 3 teams in the top 20 from the more than 67,000 teams we benchmarked. And the team that came in ranked as number 6 was a team called Sail GP. And it was established for a specific project. And this project was to promote a visa program. It was called Active Investor Plus Visa Program, and it's about trying to get people to invest in New Zealand and migrate to New Zealand. So the visa, the end goal of the project was to promote this visa program at the end of a sailing competition called Sail GP, which was they all sailed into San Francisco in May. And I've got to say, you'll see in the photo there, Australia did finish #1, followed closely by Australia. And I think it was Great Britain came third as well. Not that we're biased about Australia winning. Can say that in this organisation, Kirsty. It's in this group, Kirsty. So
it's all about Australia.
right. So out of this team, everybody was geographically located. So you'll see there down in the right-hand corner is Samantha Walsh. She's based in Connecticut. A lot of the team were based in New Zealand, some in Europe, I think some in South America, all over the world. So they're all working in different time zones. So for them, establishing a team on Microsoft Teams and working in Teams channels was the obvious place for them to work, because it's become a part of their culture. This is how they work now. One of the things that Samantha repeatedly told us about is the equality working asynchronously this way brings to everybody in the team. If they didn't work on Teams and work asynchronously, somebody's always missing out on those meetings, or somebody's awake at 3 o'clock in the morning to join that meeting. Whereas this way, everybody can join in work at their own time. And she said that things actually, they get a lot of work done a lot quicker, because, you know, she might be finishing up her day in the US and she'll put something in the Teams channel. So by the time she wakes up the next morning, New Zealand's already been at work, and they've all that work's already done. So it actually works quite quickly for them to get things done. So yeah, the equality side was quite interesting. And now, so this project, so it finished in May. They've still got some final things, you know, final, you know, potentially media or things to finish up. But now that the project's complete, or just about complete, this team really starts to slow down. And Samantha was saying that, you know, this team was pinned because it was her main project that she was working on at the time. But now that it's slowing down, she unpins it, and you know, she quietens that noise, the notifications go off, and yet all that knowledge is retained. So if they do the same project next year, they can just tap into that same team, find everything, all their files and everything they used this year, and repeat it for next year. So that was a really great example of a high-performing team. And I'm just going to quickly tell you one more about Engage Squared. You guys are probably familiar with Engage Squared. They were one of the Microsoft Partners of the Year this year. And they had the #2 top-performing team based off Laurie's rankings this year. And Emily, can you switch to the next slide? I'd love you to have a look at this. So imagine you're, well, in this case, it was a guy named Ryan who was the software developer, and he was based in New Zealand, only speaks English, doesn't speak any other languages. He actually designed all of this in Japanese. And he was able to do that again by using Microsoft Teams. So in their Tokyo office, they had a Japanese speaker, and using again, over different time zones, different geographical locations, and different languages this time, they were able to create this app in Japanese, and the client loved it so much they actually asked for another one as well. So again, those stories are all in the benchmarking report. So if you want to download the report, you can go more into depth on those, and just reading through them, hopefully you'd be able to find something that, you know, you may be able to implement into your organization to help with asynchronous collaboration and better digital working habits. But I'm going to head over to Emily now. Hand over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Sharon. And I just wanted to give a really quick visual, sort of tying in with some of the collaboration habits and the scores that Laurie was talking about earlier. And also, you know, for some of those high performing teams or even high performing individuals that we can also find for specific organizations throughout the benchmarking. This is sort of what we're referring to within the collaboration habits that we look at within SWOOP. So at the moment, this is just giving you an example on the personal level. If you imagine that I'm looking at my own dashboard, let's say I'm Frankie, this is where we have the scores against each of the different collaboration habits. So we spoke about the balance between using email and how you would be using Teams channels and Viva Engage to collaborate. We can see for this particular individual, the score is extremely high. This is a really, really strong result. And when we look at the specific insights, we can see, you know, myself, I'm sending less than one email for every Teams channel or Viva Engage message that's going out. And according to our benchmarks as well, this is where we really do have the authority to say what good looks like. So if you're wanting to reflect on your own activity, think about how much email that you're sending versus how much you're using channels and Viva Engage to collaborate. This is where we are sort of tying those scores to those different habits. Asynchronous collaborator, this is where we're looking at the balance between how much time you're spending in Teams meetings versus using those more asynchronous ways of collaborating, things like the Teams channels, Viva Engage again. For this score, you know, I'm, you know, collaborating in, well, not really collaborating, I'm in Teams meetings for 37 minutes for every channel or Viva Engage message. And the best practice, well, that's sort of quite significantly within that sort of best practice ranking that we look at as well. But we also spoke about things like, you know, how much you're using chat. We look at file sharing in terms of the split between how much you're collaborating in SharePoint versus OneDrive. And we also get into some of those, you know, best practice meeting habits as well. So for the meetings that you're participating in, are people sharing their screen? For the meetings that you're participating in, do people have their camera switched on? It sort of gives more meaning to actually deciding to meet as well. So you might be talking about a specific piece of content. These are also the things that are reflected in the scores. And it's the average of all of those different habits that we look at to calculate that overall collaboration score as well. And for when we find these top performers, you know, this is just sort of having a look at the few different segments. You know, if we're looking at the IT department, for example, we can see that, you know, they're achieving quite solid scores across the board. Perhaps there's some room for improvement looking at the file sharer habit. Maybe we want to then have a look and see what legal is doing. And perhaps this is a part of your organisation that maybe you're wanting to do work with a little bit more closely. Talk to them about the collaboration habits, give them those really specific numbers and really specific insights on those habits on how they're performing. So for this legal department, they're spending over almost 7,000 minutes in meetings for every channel or Viva Engage message. So that would, you know, obviously present a huge opportunity. But then you can also cross-reference that with some of the more kind of volume or activity-based insights too. So you can see those quick breakdowns around the amount of time that you're spending across each of these different platforms, and then even getting really specific into, you know, how many minutes, how many chat messages, how do we increase the number of channel messages in comparison to the chat. But then you can also look at this for your entire organization as well. And start to really pinpoint those areas that you'd like to focus on. So, you know, what are the parts of the organisation that are doing really well? What are the parts that need a little bit of an extra helping hand? And similar to how Sharon spoke about, you know, those best performing organisations and the best performing teams within those organisations, it's probably a really great initiative for you to look at within your own companies or with companies that you work with, to find those top performers and how you can potentially use those top performers as a great case study example for other parts of the business as well. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to walk you through some of those. I do just have a quick few last things to share. So I know that Sharon had already shared the link to access the benchmark report. If you haven't had an opportunity to go through the report just yet, I strongly recommend that you do. This is also where you'll see all of the extra insights around the case studies and a heap more information as well around those key insights and findings, really specific metrics as well around what good looks like, you know, the averages around the globe. So that's where you'll be able to download that. Otherwise, I'm sure you'll be able to find it really easy if you head to the SWOOP website. I did mention earlier that we're also starting to move our focus towards Viva Engage and SharePoint intranets as well as we move into the second half of the year. We typically release our reports for Viva Engage around sort of the October, November, December sort of time range. So we're at the point now where we are inviting organisations to participate. For Viva Engage, we have somewhere around 120 organisations that participate each year. So if you're really interested in looking at this for your own organisation or for organisations that you work with, we do have a hard cutoff of the 1st of August to have all you have to have running is just a free trial of SWOOP. And if you participate, you are considered, and we sort of analyse you to see if you are a top performer, and we will inform you if you are a top performer. But otherwise, you also receive your own custom benchmark report for the Viva Engage side of things. So this is where we can show you really clearly how far above or how far below those global averages you're currently sitting. And Laurie also kind of helps to generate those reports and provide some extra commentary, recommendations, things that you should be focusing on based on the data. So it's all completely anonymous for you to participate. There's a link there in the chat as well. Thank you for that, Sharon. Or you can use the QR code if you would like to get in touch and let us know if you're interested in participating. But that brings us to the end of what we will be looking at from the SWOOP focus. And thanks again, Kirsty, for having us. We love presenting on these sessions. So thanks, Anne.
Thanks, guys. I find it fascinating that myths around the meetings and burnout and, those things that we'll often hear from organisations or industry, that alone is always some of those little components you kind of go, well, isn't it just those that show the metrics are proving it? Burnout maybe at the top end that are doing the all day, everyday meetings, but we can burn out from so many other factors, I suppose, but meetings, taking that out of it. Matthew, you have a question from the team?
Oh, I do, and that was on exactly that topic around, okay, so people aren't meeting. So my question is, what are they doing? So is it WhatsApp messages? I mean, they have to be communicating in some way, particularly if they're frontline workers. Are they phone calling each other? What are they doing?
Well, I guess we don't really know, do we? I mean, you're right. There could be some. We know that like Emily will talk about the KFC kids in the shop. They might WhatsApp each other, and they don't necessarily sort of use the official sort of communication channels or what have you. I mean, I guess that's why we call it the silent majority. We just don't really know if they're actually communicating, or if they are they using different tool sets that maybe aren't sort of approved or what have you. Twitter, sort of whatever. We don't really know. So. But I think I think that's something that the organisation really does need to take an interest in, because if 90% of the people we have are basically invisible to us, sort of what are they doing? You might say they're probably using WhatsApp, but is that really true? It's just a guess. So yeah, I think there's a lot of scope for doing analytics with that silent majority that isn't getting much attention because we're worried about the 1% that are overloaded in meetings. So.
It is really interesting and very insightful to hear. So thanks for sharing that. And I suppose just a comment. I mean, we were in meetings in February with Microsoft, and the analytics they shared with us was identical to what you're sharing with us, right? Everyone's in chat, no one's in channels, no one's using Teams in what we would call a healthy manner. And their solution, unfortunately, is to modify tools. And unfortunately, tools don't solve this problem, right? Tools don't solve the problem. Skilled people do. And you've just given me some nice motivation to keep doing what we're doing, because there's plenty of people that need it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. It's the same thing. And I've just done literally at the end of a 1-year project, a whole heap of analytics, exactly the same thing came out of it. And it was the instant video that they were just jumping on, ton of chat, instant video, and they just make a call. They wanted to find something out, they just call. But they were still trying to email as well. And then they were getting overwhelmed in notifications because it was all in chat. And then they kind of thought, Teams just seems an extra thing. I don't want to do channels, in terms of it will be just an extra thing and more notifications. It's like, guys.
Exactly.
So, looking at that and slowly shifting the beast from, previous behaviors. So, it does. does do
I
that.
don't think we
in
can
terms of
rely on Microsoft necessarily to help with this. I mean, basically,
Yeah. It's
if you're
behavioural.
using their tool, however, they're happy, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
the people on this call that can make an impact on how people actually use things properly. I mean, I think it's, I mean, we love what they do, but as I said, they're there to sell a product, and if they're using it in the wrong way, but they're still using it, they
That's
still
it.
get a license fee for it.
That's exactly right. Thank you, guys. Is there anyone else who's got anything that questions? Thanks, Dr. Hinton.
Okay. Well,
If there
thank
aren't
you
any
for
questions,
having
please
us.
feel free to continue to type them into chat. The team can answer if you have any as I go through some of our information. Okay, let's get stuck in. Just make sure everyone's on mute. Anyway. So what's actually new across the adoption space? The videos and everything that I do in the recording from these sessions, yes, it is recorded. It does go live on the Microsoft 365 adoption channel, so you can get it. I generally put it up around about a week to 2 weeks afterwards, so that you've actually got it available to be able to go back and watch the recording at any point. There are now 93 videos on Collab Talk where I'm answering questions for the community. There's lots of others on the Collab Talk site that don't actually include me if you want to go and have a look at some of the questions that we're actually answering for you out there. So let's get in. So Microsoft had their release notes around adoption and what they're actually putting up and down on the page. So I do go in. Some of it is not as relevant as others, but let's go through a couple of the core things that I think that are important in regards to adoption. One, the Champs Call this month has some, a couple of highlights and interesting information. I have talked previously about the Emergency Operations Centre. So it's actually now at sort of version 2. If you wanted to see what that actually looks like, you can have a look and watch the latest call. Microsoft have got a new security adoption page. It's actually just had a bit of a rename. I think it was security and compliance. It's had a bit of a cleanup and an adjusting, so you can come in here. I do particularly like it because it has things like information around MFA. If you're rolling out MFA as part of your organization, if you're going to 365, there's a guide in there as well, whether I do like the guide. So in that guide, it is a PDF, unfortunately, but in that guide, it does touch on, because it's kind of all Champs, it's help desk, it's, a few other components, but they've got an end user piece in there. And some of the links off that are valuable when it comes to helping your organization around security. There's a new Viva Pulse adoption page. I'll dive into Pulse a little bit more later on. So there's a couple of core components, including a new adoption guide for Viva Pulse. It's like, what do we choose? Do we choose Viva Goals or do we choose Viva Pulse? Which is which? And then people are going, but what about Glint? And it's like, well, okay, so there's some confusion around that. It needs to be untangled a little. There's the Getting Started with Viva series. So there's some more videos that are actually sort of live on there, something to go keep an eye out. It's mainly, I've put it in because the next call is coming up on July 26th when it comes to Viva Connections and the SharePoint framework that might be of value for some. Generally, it runs around about 2 o'clock in the morning. So you could always come back and potentially watch it afterwards, but it will go live on their site towards the end of the month. Microsoft Topics have got some updated adoption guides and some new pilot guides that I do particularly like. So it's got a few core components that's actually changed around Viva Topics and what are the new filters that are available to be able to manage the topics and some of the top level metrics around experiences that would actually help you. And of course, Viva Topics of course, it's based on having the Viva license for it. Okay. There is in the champions, so in the call, the champions call that I talked about, I talk about regularly going to the champs calls. For the June one, the one thing that I did like on that June call is there was a case study with BMO Harris. That case study talks about their digital lounge. It's a video around how they help their champions to self-serve when it came to learning. And what does that look like on their SharePoint site? It's really rather organized and very cleverly done. So I do like the way that they've actually surfaced and look after their change champions there. If we didn't get to the AMA for SharePoint, OneDrive and lists, which I talked about last month, so it was on last month. If you didn't get to go and watch the video. It's got some interesting information there to be able to watch the on-demand video. So that's now live. The inside track. Now, I've talked about the inside track when it comes to some of the content previously where it had self-servicing learning, but there's also the blog. So you can go and click on like the June blog, and there's 34 in there where it brings everything together. So if you want to kind of pick out the topics that are of value to you, you could actually just work your way through that content. There has been some changes in terms of the adoption score. So if you do go in, if you've got reader rights or whatever rights it looks like for the adoption score, one of the core components that's come in is the group level aggregates. So this means that you can start to filter a little better based on a department, a country, a state, or what it looks like. Now that always comes from having good, clean identity in the first place. If you don't have some good, clean identity and you haven't dropped all of that in, it's going to be a little harder. So that comes down to the 5 attributes that actually sit in Azure. There's some information hid here around, what does that look like from the admin center? How do you do it? How do you, clean it up, for example, because you might need to do some cleaning up before it actually flows through to be able to help and support you for your group level data evaluation. And the season 7 in terms of inside teams, I know I've talked about the different seasons before. I haven't really touched on this season yet. I was on the very first session for season 6. That was the beginning of last year. It's a while ago now. It seems like yesterday. But there are a few cool ones that are actually in there. If you want to have a look at some of the plugins for Copilot, for example, it talks about Teams Premium, which I touched on last month. I think I touched on the Inside Teams video, but there are others in there to be able to support you to be able to get started. Teams Premium has actually got their new adoption page. So it's a full page on Teams Premium, which I thought was interesting because we got Teams and now we got what does it look like for adoption for Teams Premium if you're taking it on. There's also a YouTube video that's just come out around it that I have dropped in here over in the bottom left to be able to support you around Teams Premium and what does it look like. So that is part of the Superhero Champs site. They have a Converged Comms Hub series, so they talk about it in there. Underneath that Teams Premium adoption page, there's an e-book, and it's a guide for the champs, trainers, IT pros, admins, help desk. So that as a component, I do particularly like. This was one of the pages out of there to be able to help, pitch this sort of in as part of that e-book. Microsoft Teams has a new performance benchmark. It's a white paper that's actually been brought out by Gigaom. Not sure how to pronounce it, so maybe someone else might actually know, but it is a benchmark white paper. I do like it because what it can do is that it can actually help us to understand, especially as adoption or change, if you're across this space, what does it mean to actually take it on? If you were trying to do a case study around why they should take on Microsoft Teams Premium, for example, what it does is it actually goes through and it gives you a bit of an idea of the time savings by having it in place and depending on the size of the organization. So it has a little bit of a look at what that cost actually looks like as part of the benchmark. There is a new Microsoft OneDrive flip book. So there was one that we've had there for a while. This is the new one, and it does have the new look and feel of OneDrive because there's been some significant changes to the UI for OneDrive recently. So this new flip book is out. It's actually quite a good training tool as well because it's a PDF that you could plug into your learning site, and it has all the different components so you can start to see some of the pages there. So I would recommend maybe putting that one up on your learning hub, Champs Hubs, for example. So what's new in coming to 365? So that was all of what's new in adoption. Let's have a look at what's going on across the different technologies. There was a a blog that's come out in terms of getting the most out of your hybrid meeting. So this is the before, during, and post. It's a good blog. It also includes the Teams Premium license component as well. So it depends on what you've got. It will add in down the bottom, and it does actually state down the bottom of each one that this is the Premium's license and the things that you can do before, during, and after. A good blog. In terms of what's new for Teams rooms and Teams meetings, it came out at the Infocom, was presented in. So if you do have some Teams room, one of the Windows updates, and what I do like is this new AI-driven feature where it actually replaces, so there's the row, it actually replaces everyone's shared background and kind of just plugs them in across the bottom. And this is on the actual device. So I thought, oh, I like that. In public preview now is collaborative notes in Microsoft Teams meetings. So those collaborative notes that are flowing in are from Loop. So it depends on whether you're in the preview mode, is whether you're going to actually see it to be able to start playing around with some of these Loop components flowing in. We did talk about this last month when we were chatting with Daryl. There's a blog that's come in, 3 ways to reimagine hospitality and empower your frontline. There's a whole heap around frontline workers. It's not as much, there is hospitality in there, but there is a whole heap around frontline workers. And what does it actually look like to be able to come in and utilize some of that AI and be able to support some of the different technologies? So what are the different, I suppose, purpose-built solutions that are available in Teams for your frontline workers? So that will be things like walkie-talkie. It's a blog going through all the various components. I did like it. It's a good one. So the what's new to Teams meetings and Teams chat, you've got a compact chat list. So that compact chat list allows us to be able to go to the back end settings, and as part of our appearance, you can take it from comfy to compact, and you can start to see it. What it does is it brings through our information and kind of squishes it all down. If you've looked at it previously, it's kind of spread out in its bubbles. It takes it out of its bubbles and puts it more in a list. It also will bring out things like hidden message previews as well. So that will open it up. That's coming late June. Then what's new, our share app to channel or chat. So it allows you to be able to share things like our first or third party apps with other users into the chat and channels. You can go, you might want to use this app, for example. So it's got a share component. Another piece that's come through is the indicator to be able to show that there's actually new activity on the apps to be able to sort of signify something's actually going on. So this is a new indicator for your first or third party apps. Expanding of in a meeting to 2,000 news, 10,000 in a distribution list. So what happened was previously in the lobby policy, when you did a distribution list, there was only the first 1,000 that would actually be recognised as part of the organisation that could then come through the lobby. If it went higher than the 1,000, they sat in the lobby and then you had to let them in. Now that's actually changing because it wasn't actually recognised as part of being a distribution list. So now it's actually going to be up to 10,000 users as part of that distribution list will be classed as an invited user, and they'll be able to flow through. So that's a significant difference before. So if you didn't know that was a thing, it's a thing. A lot of people may not realise that they sat in the lobby when it was over 1,000. So tasks in the Microsoft Loop components will actually start syncing right across into Planner and To Do. So as you put in a Loop component, so anything that goes in, it will now sync, and as part of that assigned to me, you'll be able to see over in Planner, for example, so you can now see up the top here, it's actually got the Loop task list in there, so you can now know where it's come from. So it will actually flow through. One that I know a lot of people have been waiting since Loop came in a while ago to be able to ensure that we can actually have them with reminders and notifications. The group chat message, you can you can now coming in, so it's starting from now right through to August, to be able to go in your chat, copy the link to a specific message that you can go, you need to go and look at this message. We've had it in channels to be able to go link to the message in our channel, for example, but we haven't had it when we've got, you know, those bubbles in a chat. So that's now flowing in. Another one in terms of the Teams panel update, you've got now this QR code that's coming up on the panel, and then that way you can do an instant sort of book now for the meeting room. Okay, so that meeting room, so you can actually reserve it on your phone as part of a meeting. You can walk in and just scan the QR to be able to do it. I know, Sharon, stick with channels. I know if you're in chat, you know, to the link, trying to do the channels, guys. I don't disagree with you on that, Sharon. It's sometimes it can be a hard ask to kind of, but it's so much easier. God, you work so much faster if you do it in channels. All right. One of the things that's actually coming into Teams, and it's going to be kind of that random message. At the end in a Teams room, it will pop up the survey on the room console to be able to answer some of those questions. It is optional, and the user can actually answer as many of those questions on the survey that they want. It is random though. At the moment, it's not going to be able to be controlled by IT admin to be able to turn off the survey, but they will have it coming down the line. So it is a Net Promoter Score survey on Teams rooms. So that might be a pop-up, could frustrate your users. So just maybe be aware of that one. Making our calls in speed dial, if you do have an Apple sort of iOS, if you've got your CarPlay, it's going to have that speed dial there and your history as well. So I am liking that coming through to the Apple CarPlay personally, because I do have an iPhone. Another one is the click-through of collaborative annotations when it comes to Teams meetings. So this then means that when you are on your desktop and you go to do collaboration, there were some issues in terms of the things that you could actually do as part of the collaboration. So now you'll be able to interact with the backgrounds as well. So in your Microsoft Whiteboard and that tool set, they can then go with any other underlying content without stopping your current annotation to go and do this and do this. So I'm liking some of those changes to be able to interact with your background as well. So it's coming out soon. Now, one of the things with Microsoft Teams, when it came to attaching cloud files, there was often some issues as to where it would go or where you could pull files from. So if you're on your mobile phone, now they'll be able to see things like recent files, and it'll have a recent section as well, so that you can attach from that on your mobile phone. So that's been a recent update for both an iOS and Android flowing in. There was a featured deep dive in regards to OneDrive and what's actually happening. And we've talked about all of the changes that have gone on when it comes to OneDrive. This is a good blog to be able to have an overarching, you know, what's actually it looking like today and what are the things you can do. So it's a good kind of teaching learning page if you wanted to push it out. If you go, you know, what do you want to, what's new to OneDrive? It's now kind of collated together in a good blog. The OneDrive customer office hours, there is a sign up form if you wanted to sign up to the office hours session. It's available. They do run it monthly if you wanted to feedback. It's a bit of an AMA and a feedback and learn about upcoming features if you have a focus on OneDrive. Now in SharePoint lists, there is an update that's actually coming through for you to be able to do your custom lists and have it flow through from your organization when you create a list. Now this is all done by PowerShell commandlets. Now that will then make a change to the user interface. When someone then creates a list, they can do it from Microsoft or from the organization. And now the organization can create them, push it in as a commandlet, and it'll be available for the rest of the business. So that's flowing through. So that's more of a technical, but you might need to update in terms of the end users going, we've now got custom lists potentially. Now, some of the things that are actually coming to SharePoint list, there is a whole heap of feature updates and changes that are flowing through. The ability to add ratings, drag and pasting images directly in, seeing who's collaborating in real time, switching views by clicking on tabs. There is a mass amount of changes around. Now, we've talked previously about things like applying the filters and being able to have them flowing through, and the calendar view and a few other core components. So that is all these features that have come in. It was a blog and it was talking about it. So we're going to see lots of new changes flowing into lists, those custom templates, some of the approval integration, flows and commenting, and there's lots of little core components. I recommend going and having a look at all the various features that are coming through from Microsoft Lists. So Viva Pulse. Now, Pulse was sort of advised a little while ago that it was coming out. Now, it is in public preview, so it has hit public preview now, and it's generally available from the 20th of July, so not too much longer before it actually drops in. So Pulse is a little different than goals. If you're looking at goals is an organizational way to be able to set, the OKRs for an organization. So what are those goals for an organization? Whereas Pulse is a little bit more about the individual leader themselves being able to request those kind of ad hoc feedback so that they can then have, and they've got all these great pre-populated surveys that they can actually use as part of those templates to be able to push it out to their staff to meet a particular need at that given time. So then what they can do is get some good analysis, and they'll also have actionable recommendations, things that they might want to push out to their staff as a manager around learnings, for example. Now, Pulse is going to surface right across the office.com apps list, so you're going to see it coming through there. The Viva Home connections, the navigation through Microsoft Teams and the Viva app. So if you go click on the ellipsis in the bottom left-hand rail, for example, so when you come in, you can click on that, and then you can, if you wanted to, you can even do a pin it to the rail on the left-hand side. So it is available also in the Teams store. So all flowing through. So goals is more of a higher organizational set. Viva Pulse is more about the individual manager set to be able to help. Okay. So the Viva Connections experience, so that's actually then available to be able to create those multiple connection experiences. Now, what this means is in the past, Viva Connections was the whole of organization, and it was one thing that you would set for the whole of the business. However, we've often got subsidiaries or other organizations that are underneath the bigger banner, and it wasn't actually working to set it because a different subsidiary might actually need quite separate content from one to the other. And an employee that would come in will go, hang on a second, I don't need to see kind of that part of the organization or that subsidiary. It's not even relevant for me because we're the frontline component of the business. So now what they can do is actually set for different entities the different content that might actually flow through in Viva Connections. So they're the different things, or different languages or different whatever, okay, and that they don't then overlap. So a good one flowing thin. Does add a little level of complexity to it. You could have it for the whole of organization, but now at least you can divide it out in terms of connections. Of course, we've been talking about the Yammer and the rebranding for Viva Engage, and we talked a lot about that in the past, and we also had James Tyre coming in and talking to us about Viva Engage and what all that looked like a couple of months ago, back at the beginning of the year. What they've done is they've put a blog out and where they're actually at and what it looks like, and some of the other ways that it's surfacing information to be able to support us, because the Yammer web experience has now become Viva Engage. So some of those little core components are flipping over. It's good to keep your end user audience inside your organizations up to date as to what's next. As part of Viva Engage, some of the features that are actually new, there's some updates to the leadership corner. This is, of course, for the Microsoft Viva customers. So if you do have a license, so you've got that subscription to Viva Engage, then it gives you the leadership corner. So there's a few new features that have come in to be able to sort the feed into chronological order, filtering to be able to see unread. Employees can now access their own dedicated feed with the featured conversation, and it's actually moved to a single consolidated view. The top posts as well now have come up to the top here in a dedicated carousel within the leadership corner to be able to surface that information a little quicker for us all. Another feature is our top campaigns page. So Viva Campaigns have actually come in. If you're not sure what Viva Campaigns is, we have touched on it in the past. I have put in the blog down the bottom. So Viva Campaigns allows us, and with the, comes through on the home page, surfacing information. We can have all those sponsored campaigns are now coming in. So those sponsored campaigns. So these are things like our newly added exec sponsors, can enable then the leader to be able to push things up and the comms team to push things up around sponsored campaigns. So they will flow in as well as the trending campaigns. Viva Engage, as part of their environment, they've got the Ask Me Anything session that you can actually create. So this is not, it is a Teams meeting, but it's a meeting that actually flows through Viva Engage. So you can create those AMA events through Viva Engage. Now, there's a playbook actually available around hosting those large AMAs. They're particularly valuable. I mean, Microsoft do AMAs all the time, so I'm really not surprised that they're actually spending a lot of time and effort on things like AMAs. You can see down the bottom here, what actually happens. There's a couple of core features that I particularly like about it in terms of how many moderators you can have. There's a lot more moderators when it comes to an AMA. So, for example, they might bring in 20 of us MVPs to support as moderators to be able to answer questions. So it has a much higher level of interaction and control around co-organisers, for example. So there's a few core components in here. So Viva Engage there's the old ways of doing topics, because we've now got Microsoft Topics. The old way of doing topics in Viva Engage is actually got a migration going on to be able to improve and have it come into line to all of 365. So those shifting of the topics are coming over will then make it a lot more secure and robust because it's sitting for the whole of business rather than just in one core area. And Viva Topics was kind of started in the Yammer space, and it's now kind of got kind of reinvented, spread out. Now it's sort of migrating over. So organizations that aren't using premium, the Viva Topic experience is pretty much going to appear the same before and after migration. It's not going to look any different. But however, if you do have that license, so if you've got the premium benefits, then the topics cards will look a little different in terms of the pages and that centralization. So you might want to think about any education you need to do for Viva Engage, because the topics cards will come into line. Another one is some more controls that are actually coming into the admin center. That is that, data exports, increasing things like the audit logs, they're all core components that are actually flowing through in the admin side of things. So if you're dealing with the administration for Viva Engage. Another one for Viva Insights. So if you had the subscription, so those premium, you're going to have 10 new generated load metrics to be able to work with. Now, this is actually going to be assigned to the insight analyst role to be able to work with some of those insights. However, there's also going to be, in terms of the new card and that digest email that comes through, there's going to be a lot more flowing in around meetings. So it'll be how much time you've actually spent. It will break it all down for you and the percentage of those times, and then, what you've done over the last sort of 4 weeks. However, you need to note that you have to have had more than 40 hours of meetings. 20% of them that can then get categorized over the space of 4 weeks. So it's going to take a little bit of time for those insights to actually flow through for you. But once you got to that point, you're going to start see them all coming up. In OneNote, so one of the new features when it comes to OneNote for Windows, it's actually, sorry, OneNote for the web, I should say. In OneNote for the web, it's going to bring through for you the ability to be able to choose meetings directly from OneNote. So when you go to do, in the meeting component, so we're going to insert a meeting, what it does down the bottom, the moment, and as part of the AI, when you start to type something in, it goes, these are the suggestions when it comes to meetings to be able to sort of drop them in down the bottom. So there's a few core components around different meeting details, as well as being able to drop in those loop components, and it will bring up all sorts of different suggestions flowing into OneNote. In fact, if there's anything else, I don't know if Matt's still here, if there's anything else on the list that you can think of, I'm more than happy to be given the things that we can talk about. Another one is the Notes tab in Microsoft Teams coming into play. Now, it used to be there for EDU, so it's been there for a little while that the Notes tab was automatically OneNote. Now, it was a while ago that Notes was sort of wiki and it was being deprecated. So if you do click on your wikis now, it will give you a migration path and it will turn them to read only and will drop them into OneNote. Now, with the OneNote that actually gets created for your Microsoft team, what happens is for every channel that you create, and if they're standard channels, by the way, then it does a dedicated section for that channel automatically in your OneNote. And then that way you can start to, if you take notes, it can go in, and any notes that you take will get plugged into your channel to be able to support you for note taking. Okay. Now, it is only available for standard channels. It's not yet on the private or shared channels, by the way. So that's that powered note. And we're seeing that flowing through as well when it comes to taking notes in your meeting, and what flows through from notes in a meeting drops into things like your channels with OneNote, and if you then got those action items, it then is defaulting to loop. So we've got the loop notes actions. Okay. Another one is the navigation layout for OneNote in Windows. So this is the desktop. So those vertical tab features, you can actually change the view around in the layout options to be able to say whether they're running down the left-hand side to be able to speed you up. So that's that horizontal and or running down landscape look and feel. Okay. I know, Matt, there is some interesting things in terms of the taking notes for meetings. I think it's more because it's a part of the AI components that are actually flowing in to be able to automatically do action items. So it's all kind of collating that way. Okay, so it's just, I think it's some of that back end technology and the way that it's Copilot and AI and making for smarter meetings as part of Teams Premium. So there's a few things that are coming on in the back end around the technology. So, but a good thing to bring up when it comes to notes and what they're using in what space. So something else that used to Teams, when it comes to Visio, it is now available as a personal app, which means that it can actually be plugged in over here on the left, and it's dropped to the front to back. So I'm just going to discard because that has accidentally dropped to the back. Let's bring it forward so we can actually see it. Bring forward, bring forward, bring forward, bring forward. There we go. So you can see the getting started. Here we go. Come back again. So what you can do is bring the app in. We had Word and we had PowerPoint as a physical app. So when you went to the ellipsis, you could then go, which one do you want? So with Visio coming in, you've now got an interactive to be able to view, edit, and create Visio files without leaving Teams. So you can stay in Teams, and there's that kind of lighter app version of Visio to be able to get working and then be able to open it up down to the desktop if you need to. So that light way of working. So I'm liking the Visio flow through. In terms of Microsoft Forms, there was a whole heap flowing in terms of Microsoft Forms. One of the ones that's particularly good is the live presentation capability in Forms to be able to come in and do present mode. I'm going to show you what that actually looks like. I've got a couple of slides here for you. Another one is the AI suggestion for forms creation. Now, we've had this here for it's come in recently, dynamic theme suggestions. So if you were going in and you go, I want to do an annual leave form, it will create a form for you based on dynamic suggestions with all these AI powered, creator tips. So it just throws it up for you. That way it will flow through. We've talked about the ability to be able to edit the response and come back afterwards, as long as it's not a closed form. The moment it's closed, they can't actually edit it, but now there's going to be the save button too. So you can save halfway through and come back. So that's flowing in. Polls in channel meetings. So not just forms, but being able to do quick and easy polls. There's a PowerPoint add-on. There's been an upgrade in the PowerPoint add-on. And then there's a start page migration. Now the PowerPoint add-on allows you, and let me show you. So we've got the save my response button. Okay, so as you're going through, and you can come back and then save my response to edit button. So there's two different buttons coming through at the very end, liking that one. It's been one that's been asked for a really long time when it came to Microsoft Forms. The sharing the live survey on any screen. So this actually means that as part of, there's a present button in Forms, there's a present button. That present button allows us to be able to do things like just a really quick survey, and there's the live results that you can see quickly. Like we use, you use, I think it's Menti, wasn't it, guys, from SWOOP? Now, this is effectively giving us that very similar experience for our both our presentations, because it's got the new plugin that's actually coming in. So you've got all this live interactive as part of your presentation, or you can do it directly from Forms. So alert survey live. And we've been using things like Kahoots and, so the fact that we've now got that, I'm loving that new feature for Microsoft Forms. It will save me a ton of effort and time. Okay. There is a great blog that's actually in there around how to create visually stunning forms. So it's got a step by step. It's just kind of in a little table. One I'd recommend going and having a look at. So some of those core new features that are coming in are rather cool for Forms. I do like them. I use Forms an awful lot, so a bit of a fave of mine. Now, one of the things, the future of the mail and calendar app in Windows. So by the end of the year, they're going to be replacing mail. We had in Windows, we had the mail app, and then we had the calendar app in Outlook for Windows. So that's actually changing. So that's going to be in the new Outlook for Windows. Now, the new Outlook for Windows, you can turn it on and have a look at the preview. Personally, I am not a fan. I tried it for a good 2 months. I always say to a lot of my audience, do at least 1 month having a play around with it. But the app itself, it is too lightweight for me when it comes to business. There's so many features that are actually gone that I am not loving it. So I'm just a little bit disappointed in the new Outlook app personally. So I've gone back. I've tried it, and I've tried on all sorts of things. Don't know about anyone else and whether you've had a play around with it yet and what your thoughts are around it. But maybe go and have a look at it and see and have a play around with it. If you're a lightweight user of Outlook, it probably won't make a difference. From a consumer standpoint, I understand and I get it, and I think it's good from a consumer standpoint. But from a business standpoint, I'm not liking it. Yeah, Melina saying it's terrible. Matt, same here. Miss the case. Yeah, Lena's not happy with the new Outlook either. No, I can say hand on heart, I'm not either. And I know that there's quite a few MVPs that have fed back that as well to the team. So we'll see what happens. I reckon there's going to be a bit of a shake up. I think it's going to be a bit like OneNote of old, where it did the Windows app, and they're going, we're going to go to the new Windows app. We're not going to do the more fancy features of OneNote, and now they're merging them back together. But it's taken them nearly 5 years, so I really hope that we don't go down that road personally. Right. Another one is Outlook, the full settings window now. So when you go into settings, it will actually be the primary landing page for the settings gear icon. So in the past, that quick settings pane for Outlook is going to drop, and it's going to be the full pane now when you click on the gear icon as part of that heading inside your online Outlook environment. So it's going to be the whole of screen. Okay. The new to Excel. ton of stuff as always with Excel. Always the web is some of the stuff that I do love. However, there's a few core components when it comes to the Windows piece that are particularly of value. Now, when it comes to the Excel for the web, it's things like the formula suggestion. So when you type the equals button, it's going to give you all these formula suggestions, and it's come with the drop downs to be able to apply automatically. It will really speed you up with some of the robust formulas that it's going to bring up as a suggestion. So the moment you type equals, it's there. You can just click on it. Loving it. It will show you different formulas depending on what the analysis is that you're trying to do. So it comes down to what's the data that you selected in the first place as to what it will surface as a potential formula for you. Okay. So another one is the formula by example. So in the past, when you did things like you wanted to trim out, so you say you wanted to trim, for example, so I'll come over here, trim the space. So if you were typing it in and you were doing it without the space, it would do an auto fill. Now, it will say, do you want to apply the formula as well to this particular cell as part of the fill? Now, we saw that in a couple of other components in terms of some of the formula stuff, but do like this. Another one that is particularly value over here on the left is things like when you're doing numbers, you know how we kind of do 1, 2, 3, and then you might fill it down, but you put in a line. So if you go put a line in, then in the past, and this is in a table, by the way, so you'll see it's contained in a table. If you put a line in, you'd have to fix the numbering because you'd now have a gap. But when you do the fill now, and you can fill it with the formula, and you do put a line in or down the bottom, it will auto fill that formula and put your numbers in for you. So these sorts of things, for example, nice. Talk about saving yourself time. There's a ton of time it's going to save you. Another one, now this is on the desktop side, the guided reapply. In the past with co-authoring, there would always be sort of some issues. So on the desktop version, when it came to core thing, if you were interrupted, it would all of a sudden do the whole having some problems. Do you want to save as? And then it would cause a second version, which we don't love and discard. But with the guided reapply, it can then do review the pending changes and return to the shared file. And you can do that then with confidence that it will update. It's also as part of the feature back here, where is it? The rapid refresh. Okay, so the rapid refresh is, you'd often have to manually refresh for the features to flow through. That's not the case anymore. It's going to do a rapid refresh and bring down some of those features and functionality. Okay. PowerPoint. Now, the present in Teams button, it was there if you had a OneDrive or a SharePoint file, but if it was just saved to your desktop, it wouldn't actually be there. Now it is going to be there, so you can have the present in Teams button. It will flow if it is not stored on 365, and then it will jump up with the window to go, now save your file there to be able to do it. So it will be available, but it will prompt you to save it in so that you've actually got it as a file in the cloud. Microsoft have a new page come into play for Copilot. So it's the new blog page for our Copilot. So we are nearly done, everyone, and how to actually prepare for Copilot. So it's a new blog. So what's retiring? InfoPath Forms is going to retire by 2026. There is the removal of sections and view in the Outlook feed. Microsoft, the Bookings app did get retired. It will be final by July, just so that you can recommend the base. And Stream retirement has been extended. Looking at the release notes, events, I am presenting at the Digital Workplace Conference. I am talking about driving sustainable adoption. It will be Megan Strand and myself as Change. We're both going to be there. So if you wanted to come along. And I'm also going to be presenting the case study around some change champion, a live case study, a 1-year case study around, what was done over the space of 6 months to motivate some change champions. So, and some real life. There is lots of AMA sessions that are actually coming up if you want to join them with Microsoft. So they're all the AMA sessions. You can have a look online. The community days are there, upcoming events that are actually available. and some of the other core components. So where do you find all the same stuff I talk about, the resource links, where do I find my information, a lot of the user groups. I've put, of course, it's on YouTube. The last session is available for you to watch if you did miss it. And what's next? So the 1st of August and the 5th of September. So they are the dates for the new first Tuesday of the month. I am not going to be here. I am presenting at the Digital Workplace Conference. I am flying, and I am then going on 4.5 weeks leave. I am going on holidays, and I'm traveling right round through the UK, flying into Paris and doing a big driving holiday for 4.5 weeks, because I haven't had a holiday since I went to the MVP Summit in 2018. I have been running these for 7.5 years, and I am taking a break for the next 2 months, guys. But I will be back in October. I wanted to give you a bit of pre-warning that I'm going to have a little bit of time off on the session, but I look forward to seeing you all back again. If anyone has any thoughts, questions, comments, or anything that they would like to pass on, we've gone over a little today. We had, I said to Swoop, it was more important that we get our speakers, although I had a lot less content to present to you this month. Normally I say there's a whole heap more, but it was a little less than usual. If there aren't any other questions, if anyone wants to raise their hand, please feel free. Anything you'd like to ask or have flow in? Ask in chat. Keep an eye out, give you a chance. You're welcome, Glenna. So great to see you coming along. Appreciated. You're very welcome. If there is no more questions, I will let you all go for the month. I will see you back in October when I'm back for some leave. So, and see you, and look, come along to the conference. If you're in Melbourne, the Digital Workplace Conference, it's on the 2nd and 3rd of August. Come and see me, come and say hello if you are coming along. I look forward to seeing you there, Melina. Is anyone else going? Anyone raise your hand? Anyone else coming along? No. No other hands raised. I know. Thank you, everyone. I'll turn off the recording now.
Kirsty, before you go, can I get a photo of you back with the swoop cap on, and we can stick it on LinkedIn just for a little recap of what happened today?